darken the room.
Okay.
Push the button.
Good afternoon. We will call the October 10th, October 10th, 2017 Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust meeting to order. First item is approval of the minutes from September 26, 2017.
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. Voting. It's approved unanimously. Next is the consent docket.
Move the consent docket subject to individual consideration.
Second.
Okay. Are there any individual considerations? Seeing none, we'll vote. And it's approved unanimously. Item 4 is the concurrence docket.
Move the concurrence docket subject to individual consideration.
Second.
Thank you. Are there any individual considerations? Seeing none, we'll vote. And it's approved unanimously. Next, items for individual consideration. First, Chris, is a presentation on cost of service and rate design recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2014, cost service study was performed and implemented. It was a 3-year rate increase approved by the Trust and City Council. The last year of the rate increase was October 16. So we updated the cost service study, and we're going to present that today for the Trust review and consideration. It's a 4-year rate plan. Brett will begin the presentation, and Jennifer Ivey with Carollo is in the audience, and she is the consultant who performed the evaluation, and she'll present her findings. So with that, Brett.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Trustees. Oklahoma City's water system has actually been in service for about 100 years now, century-long commitment providing service to the community. From the earliest days when people took their buckets to the Santa Fe Depot to be filled, to the construction of the Overholser system with the lake and the water treatment plant in 18 and 20, with the historic drought of the 30s, the need for more water supply, Oklahoma City embarked on the construction of Hefner Reservoir and water treatment plant in 1947. Next slide. And then in the 50s, with further drought, the need to go for more water to southeastern Oklahoma with the construction of Atoka Reservoir and the 100-mile pipeline from Atoka to Oklahoma City, Lake Stanley Draper construction, the water treatment plant, and the transmission systems into town in those days. And then later with the purchase of the storage rights for Sardis Reservoir in 2010, and 2016, the settlement agreement with the tribes and the state of Oklahoma. History of meeting water needs of central Oklahoma has been the theme for Oklahoma City for its entire history. The next slide you see there with the second Atoka pipeline planned for construction beginning this year. We would start with that project in a series of phases. We provide service to about 1.2 million people in central Oklahoma now throughout the whole region with water contracts with the wholesale customers and a city population of about 650,000 people. A third of the state population is provided water service by our system. Those numbers are expected to grow dramatically between now and 2060. We'll be about 2 million by that time. To meet the needs of our water population and ensure resiliency of our system, as you remember when we had the drought a few years back and how low the lake levels went here in town at Hefner and Draper, and we needed that additional capacity to bring water to town so it could be treated through the Draper Water Treatment Plant. Now is the time to begin the construction of the second Atoka pipeline. A future Kaimishi pipeline will be needed between Atoka and the Kaimishi River about year 10, 12, 15 out that we will be starting that design and then the construction thereafter. Next slide. When you look at the capital plan, the 5-year plan and the 10-year plan, about 46% of all of the expenditures, the $1.3 billion in the 5-year plan, will be spent on raw water. Over the 10-year period, it drops to 34%. In the first 5 years, 70% of all the expenditures proposed in our capital plan will go for water improvements, whether it be drinking water or raw water. So you see the CIP is heavily weighted on these matters so that we can build that system up and meet those water requirements. Other major projects include the Atoka Spillway, where we had that wash away a few years ago in the flood to fix that problem, and among other things. Next slide. In detail, you see the second Atoka pipeline, the Atoka Spillway, water and wastewater pipeline replacements throughout the city, and increasing amounts in residential water and sewer line rehabilitations will be also underway. Next slide. We'll also be doing asset management program implementation, where we'll be focusing on reducing service disruptions by development of effective operation and maintenance and work plans, reducing capital costs by scheduling repair and replacements before failure, minimizing the impact on the community through planning of our work, and prioritizing the CIP based on condition assessment data and consequence of failure analysis. We'll also be working on another major project, the Interconnect, where we will make it possible for us to provide service throughout the entire city and our wholesale areas for basic water needs, even if we were to lose either Hafner or Overholser due to an emergency situation. We'll also be meeting wastewater improvement upgrades at South Canadian Wastewater Treatment Plant. Next slide. Oklahoma City in the metro area now serves 213,000 water customers directly, in addition to wholesale service to 18 communities. Our wastewater, we serve 4 communities wastewater service outside of the city. And sales to outside city customer reduces the Oklahoma City water customers' costs by spreading those capital costs and operating costs to more units as we sell more water and wastewater service to those cities. We also have reclaimed water customers. We have 4 now. 8% of our wastewater service is provided, of our wastewater discharge is provided now to those, and we expect that to significantly increase as our 4th customer comes online soon. Next slide. From a financial goal standpoint, the Trust has established long-term financial goals that have been in place for many years, and we've had through the implementation of those financial goals, Aqua has seen its bond ratings upgraded twice, now to the highest level that can be attained of AAA for both Moody's and Standard & Poor's, making it possible for us to qualify for the lowest possible borrowing rates to the benefit of our customers. We maintain ample debt service coverage, 2 times coverage for all revenues, and our 1 times fixed coverage ratio to make sure that our fixed charges will pay our debt service even in wet years. And we have innovative wholesale contracting. Base loading on our system is encouraged through the way we price for our service. We're now reached the point where 85% of all revenues we receive from wholesale contracting is from fixed charges, so that they are paying their fair share of those costs. And with that, we have evaluated through our financial advisor, Public Financial Management, many different scenarios over the last 2 years to determine which scenario to fund these improvements would result in the lowest cost to our customers as we implement the construction of the Atoka pipeline. And with that, it was determined that that was a scenario we should take forward to spread that cost over a 5-year period and implement the capital plan over 5 years. And we provided that financial plan to the cost of service consultant, Carollo Engineers, and the trustees and the council recommended that we phase in the water conservation-oriented rates in two parts. Part one was adopted 3 years ago, as Chris had indicated, going from a uniform rate to a two-block rate with consideration of expanding those groups, those blocks, to 4 for residential and 3 for non-residential at this time. And with that, I will turn that over to Jennifer Ivey to provide you with the findings and recommendations.
All right. Thank you, Brett. Okay, so before I start going into the details, I'd like to give you a brief overview of the process itself. The cost of service study is conducted in 3 parts. The first part is the revenue requirements analysis. And that's the part where we take the O&M budget, we take the CIP, the debt service payments, all of that is combined to determine what amount of revenue we need to recover from the rates. Once we have that number, we go into the next step, and that's the cost of service analysis. In this step, we take those costs, the parts of the revenue requirements, and we allocate those to functional categories. Functional categories are things like distribution system, treatment plant, water supply. On the wastewater side, again, we have treatment, we have collection system, lift stations, and so forth. After we've allocated to functional categories, we take those and we allocate them to the rate components. So on the water side, we would allocate those costs to things like your base demand or average day demand, your peaking demands, customer service. On the wastewater side, we allocate to the flow and to the different strengths, BOD and TSS. And then once we have the cost into those buckets, we can then allocate them to the customer classes themselves. So residential customers use water differently than, say, commercial customers. And so we want to reflect that by putting the appropriate costs into those different classes. And so after we've done that, we can go into the rate design phase. And this is where we determine what rates would recover the costs that we put into each customer class. What rates would recover those costs sufficiently, but also equitably. And so now we'll go through that process and show you how we got to the proposed rates. So as Brett mentioned, we've done this in 2 phases. As part of the first phase, we looked at increasing the system development charges that are applied to new development in the city. We increased them for water from $100 to $1,000 over the 3-year period for a 5-inch meter equivalent. We also adjusted the monthly base charges. We wanted to ensure that the revenue from those base charges would recover 100% of the debt service payments in each year. And so that goes back to that 1 times fixed charge ratio that Brett mentioned. And then, as he said, we went into the volumetric rates and we established a 2-block conservation-oriented rate structure for both residential and non-residential customers. And then we did recommend that in phase 2, we look at additional blocks to further encourage conservation. So now that we're in phase 2, we're recommending a 4-block residential rate structure and a 3-block non-residential rate structure. We're also going to explain a new rate or new class that we're recommending for large manufacturing customers. And then there on the slide, you can see the breakdown of the rate increases themselves. So about 2.6% of the increases that we're recommending are as a result of the Atoka pipeline. And then we have an additional 1.4% that's as a result of an increase to OG&E rates. And the remainder of that is just additional increases to O&M and CIP. So for the single-family residential customers, as I mentioned, we're recommending a 4-block rate structure. So you can see here on the left, this shows a breakdown of all of the single-family residential bills by the usage amount. So the blue lines represent where we're recommending a break in the tiers. So we're recommending the first tier to be for the first 2,000 gallons, and then the second tier would go up to 10,000 gallons. And we want to have these 2 blocks to try to keep the rates for that level of usage low, because we know that our low volume customers are doing what they can to conserve, They're mostly using indoor water. There's not much irrigation going on, and so we want them to keep their bills low. They're going to see an increase on that fixed base charge, and so we're trying to offset that with a reduced increase to their volumetric rates. Then we have the third and fourth blocks, and that's where you're going to see most of the outdoor usage, the irrigation. And these are your customers that are peaking on the system. They're causing your seasonal peaks, and so they're causing you to incur more costs to provide a larger capacity system. And so we're going to put those peaking costs into these blocks, and that's why these blocks are going to see higher increases to their rates. This graph here just shows the distribution, the same distribution that you saw in the table on the previous slide, but in a graphical form. And so the key point here is that for that fourth block, usage that's beyond 30,000 gallons a month, you only have 2% of your customer base that's even hits that block. And that amounts to about 5% of your usage that would be charged that highest rate. So it's really not very much that is actually hitting that fourth block. But we want to be sure that we're sending that message of conservation to this group. So as we look at the rates themselves and what we're recommending, Brett mentioned we're recommending a 4-year rate plan. So you can see the recommended rates for each of those 4 years as well as the current rates. For the monthly base charge, we're recommending an increase from $14.09 per month to $18.38 per month over that 4-year period, and that's for a 5/8-inch meter. So that roughly amounts to around a $1.07 increase each year. Now, if we look back at phase 1, the increase that we recommended was approximately $1.04 in each year. So it's very similar to what we had recommended before. And then below that, you see the recommended volumetric rates. So again, we're taking what was block 1, first 10,000 gallons, and we're breaking that into 2 blocks to further protect those low volume customers and give them a little bit of a benefit there. And so that first block rate is only going up by about 5 cents per year. And then block 2 is going up by roughly 18 cents per year. Then we get into what was our second block, anything beyond 10,000 gallons, and we've split that into 2 blocks. So we have 10,000 to 30,000 gallons. And again, we're now putting these peaking charges into that block and the fourth block. And so that's why you see that those 2 blocks going up by 36 cents and 82 cents per year, respectively. For non-residential customers, they pay the same fixed base charge as residential. So what you saw on the slide before for that fixed charge applies to this group as well. And then we're going from 2 blocks to 3 blocks for them. So right now, they have the first block up to their average winter consumption. And the average winter consumption is the average water consumption for the months of December through February. And the reason that we use that for non-residential customers is because this is our best estimate of what their indoor usage is. In those winter months, they're likely not going to be irrigating, and so we want to try to capture that in that first block at the lowest rate. Then we get into the second block that we've now split into 2 blocks. So our second block is 100% of that average winter consumption to 250%. And the reason why we did this is because we wanted to be able to account for those businesses that may have a seasonality to them. For example, hotels. So in the summer months, your hotels have, they have more occupancy, and so they're using more water. So it's still indoor usage, it's just that it has a seasonal component. So their bill would be increasing, or their rate would be increasing by about 19 cents per year. And then the third block, that's where we mostly have irrigation usage. And so that's going to be going up the most because that's where we put the majority of those peaking costs. And that rate would be going up by about 53 cents per year. And then, as I mentioned before, we have a new class that we're recommending. This is our large manufacturing class. These customers use a minimum of 5 million gallons per month, and they're low peakers. They're very consistent users, and so we want to provide a uniform rate for them, because if they were to be charged this non-residential tiered rate, then we would be over-recovering from them because they have such a low peaking factor. So this slide shows you some sample non-residential bills for different types of commercial customers. The top line shows you a hospital within the city. We've pulled actual bills for a local hospital. And in this case, their average winter consumption is just over 5 million gallons per month. But they are likely peaking quite a bit in other months, because you can see that their bill is pretty high. So they're hitting that second and possibly the third blocks. Whereas the customer below that, which is a local shopping mall, they have a higher average winter consumption, but their bill is significantly lower. So they're likely seeing consistent usage from month to month, and so they're benefiting from that by staying mostly in that block 1. And then you can see we've also got sample there for hotel, apartment complex, office park, and restaurant. And then we also have some sample manufacturing bills. And you can see here, because they're on a uniform rate, we don't show an average winter consumption, because it doesn't apply to them. So a manufacturing customer that uses that minimum of 5 million gallons per month, their bill is going to be, start out at roughly $15,000 a month. And a customer that uses 10 million gallons is going to be about twice that. And then finally, for water rates on the wholesale side, we really just updated the existing rate structure that we had to reflect the costs going forward. We're showing the base charges for 6-inch meter and 12-inch meter, and you can see the increases there. We have a service availability rate that includes a reservation rate and a commodity rate, and then we have an excess rate. And the one change that we did make to this structure is we split that excess rate into 2 tiers, a tier 1 and a tier 2. And this is just to, fully implement our conservation-oriented rates, even for our wholesale customers. These rates make sure that our wholesale customers are paying their proportionate share of the pipeline in the capital improvement program. And here you see some sample wholesale bills. There's a sample for the service availability customers, and then there is one take-or-pay customer, and you can see a sample bill there for them as well. Moving on to wastewater. Similar to what we had on the water side, we also have a fixed base charge for wastewater. We did increase that as well because, again, we're trying to make sure that we're recovering 100% of our debt service payments from those fixed base charges. And then for the volumetric rate, it's just a uniform rate. So you can see the increase is about 15 cents per year for that volume charge, and that's for all retail classes, single-family, multifamily, commercial, industrial. At the bottom, you can see the extra strength charges and the increases to those, and those apply to our industrial permit customers. For wholesale wastewater, it's a very simple structure here as well. We have the fixed base charge, and then we have a uniform volumetric rate. And here's a sample bill for those customers. So then when we combine the water increases and the wastewater increases, you can see here some sample bills. Now the top, that's going to be that low volume customer that we talked about, 2,000 gallons of water, 2,000 gallons of wastewater per month, and you can see that the impact of their total bill is only about $2 increase each year. The typical customer in Oklahoma City uses about 7,000 gallons of water and 5,000 of wastewater. And so you can see the next line shows that the impact to their bill is a little over $3 per year. And then you can see going down to your high volume customer using 40,000 gallons of water and 8,000 of wastewater, the impact to their bill is still less than $20 per year increase. This slide shows a comparison of Oklahoma City typical bills to those of other utilities. So you can see Oklahoma City is right there in the middle. The bill under existing rates for a typical customer, that's again 7,000 gallons water, 5,000 gallons wastewater, is just over $60 per month. And then that would increase to a little over $63 per month. And so you can see that even with the increase, Oklahoma City is still in the middle of this group. And keep in mind that all of these other utilities, this chart is showing their fiscal year 2017 rates. So it's likely that most of these will increase in the next year or two. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Brett.
So in summary, with the implementation of these rates, we would be able to procure our long-term water supply, be able to transport that water to Oklahoma City. We'll have implemented fully the conservation-oriented rates that are required to have as part of the settlement agreement. We'll have cost of service-based rates like we did the last 3 years. We'll have no subsidy between classes. We'll have a minimal impact on Block 1 and Block 2 non-peaking users, low-volume users. Wholesale customers will fund their share of system improvements, and we'll have a manufacturing rate that's fair to those customers.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Jennifer. At this time, we would entertain any questions you all may have.
Any questions? Okay. Well, I think there's a second component of the presentation. And first of all, Brett and Jennifer, thank you for your presentations. Is a resolution directing the general manager and general counsel to finalize and forward the necessary ordinance amendments to implement the recommended rate plan to council for consideration.
Move the item.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? We'll vote, and it's approved unanimously. Thank you. Now, item 6, items from trustees.
I just want to be sure that the second Atoka pipeline will be completed within 5 to 6 years from now. Is that accurate, or is that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The engineering should be completed in the spring. Then we'll go through the pipe procurement process, and we expect to award construction projects late next year.
Great.
And it's a 5-year project.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Chris, I was just looking at the lake levels, and good reports. Both Hefner and Oberhoser are above where we were a year ago. Draper continues to be replenished and is up to 80%. Is it just a lack of rain in the Atoka McGee Creek area, or was there some other reason for the decline in its lake levels?
And believe it or not, they haven't had as much rain as you might think. I was talking to folks down there when we were at the meeting a couple weeks ago, and they had some rains, but not enough to overfill the lakes, but they're pretty close to full. McGee Creek was about 10 feet down last year.
Yeah.
So now we are beginning to pump on our normal fall-winter pumping schedule, fall-winter-spring schedule to fill Draper up. We expect to have it back full next spring without any problem. And so Atoka and McGee Creek will continue to drop, but we should get some winter and spring rains to help recharge those lakes as well.
Great, thank you. And one thing that struck me was in the presentation Brett made that these upgrades will allow us to have full access to water even if one of the major lakes, Hefner or Oberhoser, were to go out of commission. And in today's world, you never know what could happen, so that's good to know.
Yes, sir. We currently have a interconnect project underway to connect the two plants, not raw water now, it's treated water. And so if one of the two plants goes down for a power issue or a storm or whatever, the other one will be able to satisfy the need throughout the city. We are about 2 years away from physically connecting the two plants and about 5 years away from physically connecting the entire system to enable that to happen. So that is a major component of our capital program. The other thing that some folks may not know, we have 131,000 acre feet available in southeast Oklahoma right now, and we can only pump 84,000 acre feet with our current pipeline and pumping systems. So part of the Atoka pipeline is not just for the additional water supply. Incidentally, the Water Board's meeting today for that permit. The additional, that delta between the 84 and the 131 would require a smaller pipe, but would require another pipe. So we're building the pipeline to convey the water we already own, in addition to the Sardis supply that we hope to get today. So the difference was maybe a 60-inch pipe versus a 72 that's under design right now. And it will also provide redundancy just in case one pipe goes out, if it breaks for some reason or another. We're hardening the system. You all saw the presentation a few weeks ago where we're putting the pipeline under the river instead of over the river. So there are a lot of really solid reasons to go forward with these projects to make sure that we have adequate water supply here in Oklahoma City through 2060.
That's great. Chris, General Manager's report.
I think we're done, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right. Citizens to be heard. Are there any citizens that would like to speak? All right. Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you.